and welcome to A Taste of Torah. I'm Rabbi Gabi Ruit, and our Torah portion this week is Parashat Vayeishev. This week begins the Joseph narrative, which is really unique in Torah because it's basically a novella. The Joseph story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, which we only see in a couple of books in the entire Tanakh and nowhere else in the first 5 books of Moses. But in the middle of this novella, we find a very strange story that doesn't seem to have anything to do with Joseph. We learn that Jacob's son Judah has gone out on his own, gotten married, and had 3 sons. He marries off his oldest son to a woman named Tamar. But Judah's son does something that displeases God, and he dies, leaving Tamar a widow. So, in keeping with the Levirate marriage customs of the time, Judah marries his second son off to Tamar as well. But the second son quickly dies also. Since Judah's youngest son is still a child, he tells Tamar to wait until his youngest son grows up and he will become Tamar's husband. Only Judah doesn't follow through, because he fears that his youngest son will also die. This leaves Tamar in a terribly precarious position. She's not allowed to marry anyone else, and she has no sons of her own. In biblical times, this is the most vulnerable position for a woman because she has no protections within society, since she has no husband or son. So Tamar takes matters into her own hands. She covers her face and puts on the clothing of a cult prostitute and waits outside the city entrance. When her father-in-law comes to the gate, he propositions her and they sleep together. He agrees to pay this unknown cult prostitute a kid from his herd. But since he doesn't have it with him, she asks for his staff and singlet as collateral. He gives them to her and he goes on his way. Then she takes off her face covering and her costume and goes back home. When Judah's messenger goes to pay the cult prostitute and get Judah's collateral back, she is nowhere to be found. But a few months later, Judah is told that his daughter-in-law Tamar has been a harlot and is pregnant, and he is incensed. He orders that Tamar be taken out and burned to death because she engaged in harlotry. But Tamar has an ace up her sleeve. She sends the singlet and staff that she had taken from Judah back to him with the message that the owner is the one who got her pregnant. At that point, Judah realizes that he is the one who is in the wrong because he left her in a terrible position by not giving his youngest son to her as promised. Tamar goes on to have 2 twin sons, Perez and Zerah. And the story comes to full circle in the book of Ruth, where we learn that Perez, Tamar's son, is the forebearer of King David himself. So the abandoned widow, accused of harlotry, goes on to be the foremother and of the eventual Messiah. What are we to make of Tamar and this strange story in the middle of the Joseph narrative? One interpretation I really like comes from a teaching by Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburgh, a Hasidic rabbi who lives in Israel. He examines Tamar's name and its many meanings. A Tamar is a palm date, a date palm. It's one of the 7 species with which the land of Israel is blessed, and it produces sweet, succulent fruit. Tamar is also the root of the word Toarah, which means exchange. And the word Tamar can also be broken into 2 words, tam, which means complete, and mar, which means bitter. This suggests the completion or ending of bitterness. As Rabbi Ginsburgh puts it, like a date palm, which can turn an arid wilderness into a flourishing oasis, Tamar knew how to exchange bitter for sweet. The date palm thrives on the salt water, which is bitter, transforming it into honey sweet fruit. I would add that Tamar's ability to exchange the bitterness of the situation Judah created into the sweetness of being the foremother of the Messiah took initiative and daring on the part of Tamar. If she had simply accepted her humbled position as a widow in a patriarchal society, she would have died a lonely and childless, vulnerable widow. Instead, she stepped outside the oppressive parameters of the patriarchal society and created her own path. To me, that is sweetness indeed. Shabbat Shalom.